Look, I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound absolutely insane. I know how it sounds, trust me. I've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to figure out how to even start this thing. My hands are shaking so bad I can barely type, and I've already gone through half a pack of cigarettes just trying to calm my nerves. But I need to get this out. I need someone to know what happened, even if you think I'm completely losing it. Because if something happens to me, and honestly, at this point, I'm pretty sure something will, at least there'll be some kind of record. My name's Jake Morrison, and 3 weeks ago, my great-uncle Harold died. I barely knew the guy. He was one of those family members you hear about at Thanksgiving but never actually meet, you know? The weird hermit uncle who lived alone in some old house upstate. Mom always said he was eccentric, which is family code for probably nuts but harmless. Turns out Harold left me his house in his will. Yeah, me. Not my mom, not my dad, not any of the cousins who actually visited him once in a while. Just me, the 26-year-old nephew who worked at a dead-end IT job and lived in a studio apartment that smelled like the Chinese takeout place downstairs. The lawyer, this ancient dude with thick glasses and a voice like gravel, called me on a Tuesday morning. I thought it was a scam at first. You know how those go, congratulations, you've inherited millions from a Nigerian prince, or whatever. But he had details. Real details about my family, about Harold, about things you couldn't just Google. Mr. Morrison left specific instructions. The lawyer wheezed through the phone. The house and all its contents are yours, but there are conditions. What kind of conditions? You'll need to come to my office to discuss the details. Some matters are too sensitive for phone calls. That should have been my first red flag right there. But I was broke, working 60 hours a week just to make rent, and the idea of owning actual property sounded like winning the lottery. So I took a day off and drove down to his office in this tiny town I'd never heard of. The lawyer's office looked like something out of a 1940s movie. Dark wood paneling, dusty law books stacked everywhere, and this weird musty smell that reminded me of my grandmother's attic. The lawyer himself, Mr. Garrett, looked even older in person. His hands shook when he handed me the documents. Your uncle was very specific about these instructions, he said, sliding a thick envelope across his desk. He was quite insistent that you follow them exactly. Inside the envelope was a set of keys and a letter written in Harold's scratchy handwriting. The letter was weird, really weird. It started normal enough, thanking me for being the only one in the family with sense and apologizing for dumping this responsibility on me. But then it got strange. Asterisk Jake, there are rules you must follow. These aren't suggestions or old man superstitions. These are life and death rules, and I mean that literally. The house has been in our family for 4 generations, and each generation has learned the same hard truths I'm about to share with you. Asterisk. Asterisk first, never go into the basement after sunset. During the day is fine, but when the sun goes down, stay upstairs. No exceptions. Asterisk. Asterisk second. Every night before bed, check that all the windows on the second floor are locked. All of them. Even if you check them an hour before. Asterisk. Asterisk third. If you hear knocking at the front door after midnight, do not answer it. Do not look out the windows to see who it is. Go to your bedroom and wait until morning. Asterisk. Asterisk, and most importantly, Jake, the most important rule of all, there is a door in the hallway upstairs. It's painted black and it has 3 different locks. That door must never be opened. Not for any reason. Not if you hear someone calling for help from inside. Not if the house is on fire. Not if your life depends on it. Asterisk. Asterisk, I know how this sounds. I know you probably think your old uncle finally lost his marbles. But Jake, I'm begging you, please trust me on this. That door has been locked for 60 years and it needs to stay that way. What's behind it? It's not meant for this world. Asterisk. Asterisk, if you can't handle these rules, sell the house. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to figure out what it all means. Just sell it and walk away. Asterisk. Asterisk, but if you stay, follow the rules. Your life depends on it. Asterisk. Uncle Harold. Asterisk P.S. There's cash hidden in the kitchen pantry behind the flour canisters. Should be enough to get you started. Asterisk. I sat there staring at the letter for a good 5 minutes. Mr. Garrett watched me the whole time, his watery blue eyes never leaving my face. Your uncle was a good man, he finally said. Eccentric, yes, but good. He took care of that house for 43 years without incident. Without incident? I looked up from the letter. What kind of incidents are we talking about here? The old lawyer's face went pale. He shuffled through some papers on his desk, not meeting my eyes. Just follow the rules, Mr. Morrison. Your uncle knew what he was talking about. I wanted to ask more questions, but something in his tone told me the conversation was over. He handed me the deed, another set of documents, and a business card for a local handyman, in case anything needs fixing. The drive to Harold's house took about 2 hours through winding back roads and tiny towns that looked like time forgot them. The GPS kept losing signal, and I had to stop twice to ask for directions from locals who gave me weird looks when I mentioned Harold's address. The house itself was not what I expected. It was big, sure, but not mansion big. Just a tall, narrow Victorian with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. 3 stories, lots of windows, and this tower thing on one side that made it look like something out of a horror movie. The yard was overgrown, and there were these massive oak trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. But it was mine. After years of apartment living and noise complaints and landlords who wouldn't fix anything, I had my own house. A weird house with crazy rules, but still. I found the key Harold had mentioned. It was under a fake rock by the front steps, just like he'd said in another note. The front door opened with this long, creaky groan that echoed through the empty hallway. The inside was like stepping back in time. Dark wood floors, tall ceilings, and furniture that looked like it came from an antique shop. Everything was clean though, which surprised me. I'd expected dust and cobwebs, but someone had been taking care of the place. I spent the first hour just walking around, getting a feel for the layout. First floor had a living room, dining room, kitchen, and this little study filled with old books. Second floor had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. And the third floor? Well, that was where things got interesting. The stairs to the third floor were narrow and steep, and they creaked with every step. At the top was a long hallway with doors on both sides. Most of them opened to small, empty rooms or storage closets. But at the very end of the hall, there it was. The black door. It wasn't just painted black. It was like someone had taken the concept of darkness and turned it into wood. 3 heavy locks just like Harold had described. Old-fashioned deadbolts that looked like they could stop a battering ram. And there was something else, something that made my skin crawl just looking at it. So I pretended she wasn't there. Kept my eyes on the magazine I'd found under the counter. Some ancient issue of People with a celebrity on the cover I didn't recognize. But I could hear her moving around, the soft whisper of her feet on the checkerboard floor, the gentle rustle of fabric. She went to the third washing machine from the left, and I heard the distinctive sound of quarters dropping into the slot. Clink, 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 clink. Then water started running and the machine began its familiar rumbling cycle. Only then did I look up and nod at her, the way you acknowledge any other customer. She nodded back, but something was off about her face. The features were all there: eyes, nose, mouth, but they seemed loose somehow, like they hadn't been properly attached and might slide around if she moved too quickly. She took a seat in one of the plastic chairs near her machine, pulled out some knitting and started working. Click, click, click went her needles, keeping perfect time with the washing machine's rhythm. Nothing weird about that, right? Just an old lady doing laundry and killing time. Except the clothes in her basket hadn't been children's clothes when she'd pulled them out to load the machine. They'd been adult-sized, dark colors, the kind of stuff you'd expect a 60-year-old woman to wear. But I'd definitely seen tiny shirts and little jeans when she'd walked in. I told myself I was imagining things. Stress, probably, or the weird lighting in this place playing tricks on my eyes. I went back to the magazine trying to focus on an article about some actor's divorce, but I kept glancing up at the woman. She'd stopped knitting and was just sitting there, staring at the center table with an expression of intense concentration. Her mouth was moving slightly, like she was having a conversation with someone I couldn't see. And her knitting needles, they were still clicking. Still keeping that perfect rhythm with the washing machine, even though her hands weren't moving anymore. At 11:23, a guy in his 20s came in carrying a garbage bag full of clothes. He looked normal enough: jeans, band t-shirt, sneakers that had seen better days. College kid, probably, judging by the way he looked around the place like he'd never done his own laundry before. He went straight to the change machine in the corner, fed it a $20 bill, and started collecting quarters. That's when I noticed the old woman had stopped staring at the center table and was now watching him with the kind of intensity that made my skin crawl. The kid loaded his clothes into a machine, added detergent, and started it up. Standard procedure. But when he turned around to find a seat, the old woman spoke for the first time since she'd arrived. "What time is it, honey?" The kid checked his phone. 11:25, he said. Rule 2 hit me like a slap in the face. If someone asks what time it is, always say, "Almost closing time," regardless of the actual time. "Actually," I called out quickly, "it's almost closing time." Both of them looked at me like I'd just spoken in tongues. The kid glanced at his phone again, confusion written all over his face. "But it's only dash. Almost closing time," I repeated firmly. The old woman's loose features rearranged themselves into what might have been a smile. "That's right," she said softly. "Almost closing time." The kid shrugged and found a chair, pulling out his phone to scroll through whatever college kids scroll through at 11:30 p.m. But I noticed he kept glancing at the clock on the wall, then at his phone like he was trying to figure out if one of them was broken. The next hour passed without incident, unless you counted the way the old woman's knitting needles never stopped clicking even when she wasn't knitting, or how the kid's reflection in the window seemed to be doing different things than he was actually doing. But hey, maybe my eyes were just tired. At 12:37 a.m., they both finished their loads and left within minutes of each other. The woman nodded at me on her way out, and for just a second, her face looked completely normal. Human. Then she was gone, and I was alone with the humming machines and that sweet, wrong smell that seemed to be getting stronger. I was starting to relax, thinking maybe this job wouldn't be so bad after all, when I heard it. Children laughing. It was faint at first, like it was coming from far away, but it got louder and clearer by the second. High, bright laughter, the kind kids make when they're playing games that only make sense to them. But there were no children in the laundromat. Hell, there was nobody in the laundromat except me. Rule 6. If you hear children laughing, turn on the radio immediately. I looked around frantically for a radio and spotted one on the shelf behind the counter, an old boom box that looked like it belonged in the 1990s. I hit the power button and static filled the air, loud and harsh and beautiful because it drowned out that laughter completely. I didn't bother trying to find a station. The static was working just fine. The laughter stopped as soon as the radio came on, but I left it running anyway. Better safe than sorry, right? And honestly, the white noise was kind of comforting. Made the place feel less empty, less wrong. At 1:15 a.m., a woman walked in wearing a white sundress, white sandals, and a white headband that held back perfectly white hair. She looked like she was maybe 40, but her hair suggested either really bad genetics or something else entirely. Rule 7 screamed in my head. Never make direct eye contact with anyone who comes in wearing all white. I kept my eyes firmly fixed on my magazine while she loaded two machines with what sounded like a lot of clothes. Quarters clinked, water ran, machines started their cycles. Normal laundromat stuff except for how wrong everything felt. She sat down in a chair where I could see her in my peripheral vision, and that's when I realized why direct eye contact was forbidden. Her eyes weren't quite right. They reflected the fluorescent lights like an animal's eyes, and they never seemed to blink. She just sat there, perfectly still, staring straight ahead at nothing. And she was humming. It was barely audible over the radio static in the washing machines, but it was there. A tune I almost recognized but couldn't quite place, something that made my teeth ache and my stomach clench. It went on, never changing, never getting louder or softer, just that same few notes repeated endlessly. I focused on my magazine so hard that I memorized an entire article about celebrity fashion disasters, but I could feel her presence like a cold spot in the room. The static from the radio started to develop patterns, almost like voices trying to break through, but I turned up the volume until it was loud enough to make my ears ring. She left at 2:43 a.m. without saying a word. Just collected her clothes, folded them with mechanical precision, and walked out. The second the door closed behind her, the radio static cleared up and started playing actual music. Some oldie station playing songs from the 1960s. I should have been relieved, but somehow the music was worse than the static. Every song felt wrong, like the words didn't quite match the melodies, or like they were being sung by people trying very hard to sound human. At exactly 3 a.m., the phone rang. My dad died 3 years ago in a car accident on Route 95. I was at his funeral. I watched them lower his casket into the ground. I have his death certificate in a box back at my old apartment, along with all the insurance paperwork and sympathy cards from people who barely knew him. So hearing his voice coming from behind that door should have been impossible. But it was him. I knew that voice better than my own, the slight rasp from years of smoking, the way he drew out certain vowels, that particular inflection he used when he was scared or hurt. This was my father's voice, and he was begging for help. "Jake, please," the voice continued, muffled but desperate. "I don't know how long I've been in here. It's so dark and I can't find a way out. You have to open the door, son. You're the only one who can help me." I stood there in that freezing hallway, flashlight shaking in my hand, bat clutched so tight my knuckles were white. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that I was having some kind of breakdown, that dead people don't get trapped behind locked doors in old houses. But the voice was so real, so familiar, and the desperation in it, God, it broke my heart. "Dad," I whispered, stepping closer to the door. "Jake, thank God you can hear me. I've been calling out for days, but no one answered. Where am I, son? How did I get here?" My hand moved toward the first lock before I caught myself. Harold's warning echoed in my head. Asterisk, that door must never be opened. Not for any reason. Not if you hear someone calling for help from inside. Asterisk. But this was my father. My actual father, scared and trapped and calling for me. Dad, I don't understand. You died 3 years ago. I was at your funeral. Silence from behind the door. Then quietly, I don't remember dying, Jake. I remember driving to see you and then, nothing. Just darkness and cold in this place. Please, I'm so scared. I've never been this scared in my life. The emotion in his voice was killing me. This was the same man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with my math homework, who'd held me when Mom left us when I was 12. He'd never once admitted to being scared of anything, not even when the doctors told him about the cancer they found in his lungs 2 months before the accident. I need to think, I said, backing away from the door. I need to figure this out. Don't leave me, Jake. Please don't leave me alone in here again. But I was already heading down the stairs, my mind racing. I needed to get out of that hallway, away from that voice, so I could think clearly. I spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what was happening. By the time the sun came up, I'd convinced myself it had been a dream, or maybe some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Moving into a weird old house, following bizarre rules, living in isolation, it was enough to mess with anyone's head. But when I went back upstairs around noon to check the locks, I'd started doing this every day like a compulsion, I found something that made my stomach drop. Scratch marks on the inside of the door. Fresh ones. Long gouges in the wood, like someone had been clawing at it with their fingernails trying to get out. I called Mr. Garrett, the lawyer. Maybe he knew something about the history of the house, about what Harold had been dealing with all these years. But when his secretary answered, she told me Mr. Garrett had suffered a heart attack 2 days after our meeting and was in intensive care. He's not taking any calls, she said. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait until he recovers. If he recovers, I thought but didn't say. I tried researching the house online, but there wasn't much information. It had been built in 1887 by some railroad baron, passed through a few families, then ended up with the Morrisons in the 1920s. Harold's grandfather had bought it during the Depression for next to nothing. What I did find was a newspaper article from 1962 about Harold's father, my great-grandfather Thomas Morrison. The headline read, "Local man found dead in locked room, police baffled by circumstances." According to the article, Thomas had been found dead in a secured room on the 3rd floor of his home. The door had been locked from the outside with multiple deadbolts, but there was no sign of foul play. The article mentioned that Harold, who was 19 at the time, had inherited the house and claimed his father had died of natural causes brought on by extreme stress. The article also mentioned that neighbors had reported unusual sounds and disturbances coming from the Morrison house for weeks before Thomas's death, but police found no evidence of criminal activity. That night, the knocking came again. This time at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes earlier than before. I was ready for it. I'd been sitting in the living room since 11, lights off, waiting. When I heard those 3 slow, deliberate knocks, I didn't move from my chair. The knocking repeated every few minutes for about an hour. Always the same rhythm, always patient. But this time, I heard something else, whispering between the knocks. Too quiet to make out the words, but definitely voices. Multiple voices, having some kind of conversation on my front porch. When it finally stopped, I waited another hour before checking the window. The wet footprints were back, but this time there were more of them. At least 3 sets, maybe 4, all with that same backward pattern walking away from the door. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear movement upstairs. Footsteps, creaking boards, and occasionally that voice calling for me. "Jake? Are you there, son? I think I hear you moving around. Please just open one of the locks. You don't have to open the door all the way." By the 3rd night, I was starting to crack. The voice had gotten more desperate, more creative in its pleading. It knew things about my childhood that no one else would know. The time I broke Mom's favorite vase and blamed it on the cat, the recurring nightmares I'd had about drowning, the secret crush I'd had on my 5th grade teacher. "Remember when you were 8 and you got lost at the mall?" The voice said around 3 a.m. "You were so scared, crying by the fountain until security found you. I bought you that chocolate ice cream cone to make you feel better. You said it was the best ice cream you'd ever had." I remembered that day perfectly. Dad had been frantic when he found me, but he'd hidden it well, just scooped me up and told me everything was okay. "I'm scared now like you were then, Jake. Please don't leave me lost in the dark." That almost broke me. I actually had my hand on the first lock before I forced myself to stop. Something was wrong here, something beyond just my dead father being trapped behind a door. The voice was too perfect, too exactly like I remembered. And there were little things, the way it never seemed to breathe between words, how it could talk for minutes without pause, the fact that it somehow knew I was there even when I was trying to be silent. I started paying closer attention to the details. The voice claimed to have been trapped for days, but Dad had been dead for 3 years. It said it didn't remember dying, but it remembered driving to see me, something that had never happened. Dad had died on his way to work, not on his way to my apartment. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that this wasn't really my father. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to ignore. On the 4th night, things escalated. I was in the kitchen around midnight, making another pot of coffee, when I heard the front door open. Not a knock this time. The actual sound of the door swinging open and footsteps entering the house. My blood went cold. I checked that door 3 times before coming downstairs. It was locked, deadbolt, and chained. There was no way someone could just walk in. But I could hear them moving around in the living room. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone exploring unfamiliar territory. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and crept toward the kitchen doorway. The footsteps were getting closer, moving from the living room toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. Jake. It was my father's voice, but it wasn't coming from upstairs anymore. It was coming from the living room, getting closer with each step. I got out, son. I found another way. We can finally talk properly. This was wrong. This was so incredibly wrong. If my father had somehow gotten out of that locked room, why hadn't I heard the locks being opened? And how was he walking around when he'd been dead for 3 years? The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen. I pressed myself against the wall next to the doorway, knife raised, trying not to breathe. I know you're in there, Jake. I can smell you. That same smell you had as a baby, milk and soap and something else. Something sweet. My father had never talked like that. Never used those words, never had that particular tone. This thing wearing his voice was getting it wrong, like an actor who'd studied the role but missed the subtle nuances that made it real. Come out, son. Let me see you. Let me hold you like I used to. I stayed pressed against the wall, knife trembling in my hand. Whatever was in my living room, it wasn't my father. But it knew his voice, his memories, and it had somehow gotten past 3 locked doors. Then I heard something that made my heart stop. The sound of the front door closing and locking. 3 distinct clicks as the deadbolts turned. Whatever was in my house had just locked us in together. There we go, the voice said, and I could hear the smile in it. Now we can have some real privacy. Just you and me, Jake. Just like the old days. The footsteps started moving again, but they weren't heading toward the kitchen anymore. They were going upstairs. I heard them climbing the stairs to the 2nd floor, then continuing up to the 3rd. The floorboards creaked as they moved down the hallway toward that black door. Then I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. The sound of locks being opened from the inside. Click, click, click. 3 locks opening one by one. And then my father's voice, but somehow different now. Deeper. Hungrier. Oh, Jake, you have no idea how long we've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who belongs to this family. Someone who can open doors that have been closed for so very long. I ran. I dropped the knife and ran for the back door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, the deadbolt disengaged, but the door stayed shut like it was welded in place. All the windows were the same way. They looked normal, but they wouldn't budge no matter how hard I pushed or pulled. I was trapped in the house with whatever had been pretending to be my father. The footsteps were coming back downstairs now, slow and deliberate, and there were more of them than before. Multiple sets of feet moving through my house, all heading toward the kitchen. Jake. The voice called out, but it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was several voices speaking in unison, all slightly off from each other like a badly tuned choir. Don't make this harder than it has to be. We just want to talk. I grabbed my phone and tried to call 911, but there was no signal. No bars at all, like something was blocking the transmission. The footsteps were in the hallway now, just outside the kitchen. We know you're scared, Jake. We were scared too when we first came here. But it gets better. You learn to appreciate the company. I looked around desperately for another way out. There was a small window above the sink, but it was too high and too narrow. The basement door was on the other side of the kitchen, which meant I'd have to get past whatever was coming for me. Your great-grandfather Thomas understood eventually. He fought it for weeks, but he came around. And Harold was such a good caretaker. 43 years he fed us, kept us comfortable. But he got old, Jake. Old and weak. We need someone younger now. Someone stronger. The voices were right outside the kitchen doorway. Someone who can help us grow. And that's when I saw them. They looked like people at first glance, humanoid shapes standing in my hallway. But the details were all wrong. Their skin was too pale, almost translucent, and I could see dark veins underneath like cracks in marble. Their eyes were solid black, no whites or iris, just endless darkness. And they moved wrong, like they were underwater or learning how to use bodies that didn't quite fit. The one in front looked like my father, but it was like someone had tried to recreate him from a half-remembered description. The face was close but not quite right, features slightly off, proportions that didn't match what I remembered. "Hello, son," it said with my father's voice. "We've been waiting so long to meet you properly." Behind it were others. I recognized some of them from old family photos. Great-grandfather Thomas, looking exactly like he had in the newspaper article about his death. A woman who might have been Harold's mother. And others I didn't recognize, all with that same translucent skin and black eyes. "What do you want?" I managed to whisper. The thing wearing my father's face smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. "We want you to join us, Jake. This house has been in your family for generations, and each generation has contributed to our community. Your blood, your memories, your life force, they're the key to keeping that door open, to keeping us fed." "The door's supposed to stay locked," I said, backing toward the sink. "Oh, it is locked," another voice said. "Thomas, I think. Locked from your side. But we've been on this side for so long, Jake. So very long. And we're hungry." The fake father thing took a step into the kitchen. "Harold fed us for decades, brought us what we needed. But he's gone now, and the door grows weak without a Morrison to tend it. We need you to take his place. What if I refuse?" They all smiled at once, a dozen mouths full of sharp teeth. "Oh, Jake," the father thing said, "you don't have a choice anymore. You opened the locks from your side when you came to investigate. Just being in that hallway, just touching those deadbolts, that was enough. The connection is made now." I realized with growing horror that it was right. I had touched those locks multiple times. I'd been drawn to that door from the moment I arrived. "But don't worry," it continued, moving closer. "You won't be alone. We're family after all. And family sticks together." The others started filing into the kitchen, surrounding me. "Forever and ever," they said in unison. That's when I made my decision. "If you're going to die, you might as well go down swinging." That's what my real father used to say back when I was a kid complaining about bullies at school. He'd ruffle my hair and tell me that sometimes you can't avoid a fight, but you can choose how you face it. So that's what I did. I grabbed the biggest knife from the butcher block and lunged at the thing wearing my father's face. The blade went right through it like it was made of smoke. No resistance, no blood, nothing. The entity just smiled wider, those two sharp teeth gleaming in the kitchen light. "Now, Jake, that's not very nice," it said, tilting its head at an impossible angle. "Is that any way to treat your family?" But my desperate attack had done something. For just a second, the thing's form had flickered like a bad TV signal. And in that flicker, I'd seen something underneath, something dark and writhing and definitely not human. "You're not my family," I snarled, backing toward the basement door. "You're just parasites wearing their faces." The entities exchanged looks, and I heard something that chilled me to the bone: laughter. Dozens of voices laughing in harmony, like children who'd been caught playing a game. "Oh, Jake," the Thomas thing said, shaking its head. "You still don't understand. We are your family now. We have their memories, their voices, their love for you. What's the difference?" "The difference is they're dead. Death is just a transition," the father thing replied, moving closer. "A doorway from one state of being to another. Your father didn't cease to exist when he died, Jake. He just changed location." I reached behind me and grabbed the basement door handle. It turned easily. Apparently, whatever was keeping the other doors locked didn't extend to this one. "Where are you going, son?" the father thing asked, concern creeping into its voice. "You don't want to go down there. Not at night. Harold's first rule: never go into the basement after sunset." But I was out of options, and these things seemed genuinely worried about me going downstairs. That had to mean something. I yanked the door open and plunged down the wooden steps, using my phone's flashlight to see. Behind me, I heard the entities talking in rapid, overlapping whispers. They sounded agitated. The basement was exactly like I remembered: stone walls, dirt floor, and that weird smell I'd never been able to identify. But now, with my phone light cutting through the darkness, I could see things I'd missed during my daytime explorations. Symbols carved into the stone walls. Not just random scratches, but deliberate patterns that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And in the far corner, partially hidden behind an old furnace, was another door. This one was different from the black door upstairs. It was made of some kind of metal, covered in more of those carved symbols, and it had no visible locks or handles. But I could feel something beyond it, a presence that made the entities upstairs feel like house cats compared to a tiger. "Jake." The father thing's voice echoed down the stairs. "Come back up here. You don't know what you're doing." For the first time since this nightmare began, these things sounded scared. I approached the metal door slowly, phone light dancing across its surface. The symbols seemed to pulse with a faint light of their own, and as I got closer, I started to understand what I was looking at. They weren't just random carvings. They were a map. A genealogy tree showing generation after generation of Morrisons, all connected by flowing lines that led to a central symbol, the same symbol that was painted above the black door upstairs. And at the bottom of the tree, recently carved in fresh stone, was my name. "Oh God," I whispered. "Jake, please?" The entities were at the top of the stairs now, but they weren't coming down. "You need to come away from there. That door isn't for the living." But I was starting to piece things together. The Morrison family hadn't just been caretakers for these entities, they'd been prisoners. Each generation had been tricked or coerced into feeding the things upstairs, keeping them satisfied so they wouldn't break free and spread beyond the house. And the metal door, that wasn't keeping something out. It was keeping something in. Something that even the entities feared. I pressed my hand against the cold metal surface and instantly, images flooded my mind. I saw Harold as a young man, standing in this same basement with his father Thomas. I saw Thomas explaining the family burden, the terrible choice that each Morrison had to make. I saw Harold accepting his role as keeper of the house, guardian of secrets that were too dangerous to let loose upon the world. But I also saw something else. A way out. A choice that none of the previous Morrisons had been brave enough to make. The metal door wasn't just a prison. It was a gateway. And according to the symbols on its surface, it could only be opened by Morrison blood, freely given. "Jake." The entities were getting more frantic now. "Whatever you're thinking, don't do it. You'll doom us all." Maybe that was the point. I pulled out my pocket knife and drew the blade across my palm, hissing at the sharp pain. Blood welled up immediately, dark red in the phone's light. "No." The father thing screamed, and I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. "Jake, you don't understand what you're unleashing." But I pressed my bleeding hand against the central symbol on the metal door, and everything changed. The door didn't open, it dissolved. Like it had been made of shadow and mist instead of solid metal. Beyond it was not another room, but something that hurt to look at directly. A space that was too large for the basement, too dark for any earthly darkness. And something was moving in that space. Something vast and hungry and infinitely patient. The entities behind me were screaming now, their human disguises falling away completely. I could hear them scrambling back up the stairs, their inhuman forms scraping against the walls as they fled. But it was too late. The thing beyond the door was already emerging. It came out like smoke at first, then solidified into something that my brain refused to process properly. It was huge, bigger than the basement, bigger than the house itself, somehow existing in more dimensions than the three I could perceive. And it was angry. So incredibly angry. The entities upstairs were shrieking in terror as the thing flowed through the house like a dark tide. I could hear furniture being destroyed, walls cracking, the very foundations of the building groaning under impossible pressure. But the thing didn't touch me. As it passed by, flowing around me like water around a stone, I felt something that might have been gratitude? Recognition? Finally, a voice whispered in my mind. Not words exactly, but concepts that my brain translated into language. Asterisk, so long trapped. So long hungry. The Morrison line ends and the binding breaks. Asterisk. The house was coming apart around me. I could hear the entities being consumed, their screams cutting off one by one as the thing reclaimed what had been stolen from it over the decades. They had been parasites feeding on my family, but they were nothing compared to what they had been keeping caged. The flight was rough, way rougher than it should have been. We hit turbulence over Kansas that had the pilots genuinely spooked. I could hear them over the intercom, trying to sound calm while they discussed unusual atmospheric disturbances and pressure differentials that shouldn't be possible. I looked out the window during the worst of it and saw something that made my stomach drop. Far below us, moving across the wheat fields like a living shadow, was a darkness that seemed to bend the landscape around it. It was huge, maybe a mile across, and it moved with purpose, following some invisible trail only it could perceive. The other passengers were complaining about the turbulence, but they couldn't see what I could see. The thing down there wasn't causing the rough air, it was the rough air. Its presence was so massive, so fundamentally wrong for this reality, that it warped everything around it just by existing. When we landed in Seattle, I rented a car and started driving toward the areas where the sleep disorders were most concentrated. I didn't have a plan exactly. I just knew I had to see for myself what I'd unleashed. The first town I hit was Riverside, population 847. Half the residents were in the local hospital's makeshift coma ward. The other half looked like they hadn't slept in weeks, hollow-eyed and jumpy, constantly looking over their shoulders like they expected something to creep up behind them. I talked to one of the doctors, Dr. Sarah Chin, who'd been working with the affected patients for 2 weeks. "It's unlike anything in the medical literature," she told me, rubbing her tired eyes. "Their bodies are perfectly healthy. Blood work is normal, brain scans show no abnormalities, but they're just gone. Like someone reached into their heads and scooped out everything that makes them who they are." "Any theories about what's causing it?" I asked. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want my professional opinion? Some kind of airborne pathogen that affects neurochemistry. But you want to know what I really think?" I nodded. "I think something is feeding on them. Something that eats consciousness itself. And I think it's moving south." She was right. I followed the trail of sleep disorders down through Oregon and into Northern California, staying maybe a week behind the thing's path. Every town I visited had the same story: people falling into inexplicable comas, others too terrified to sleep, and a creeping sense of wrongness that seemed to hang over everything like fog. But there were other changes too. Subtler things that most people probably didn't notice. Colors seemed more vivid in the affected areas, but also somehow wrong, like someone had adjusted the contrast settings on reality. Animals behaved strangely, gathering in large groups and staring at the sky. And the dreams? Even people who weren't falling into comas were having the most vivid, disturbing dreams of their lives. Dreams that felt more real than waking life. Dreams that seemed to show them things that were happening in other places, other times, maybe other dimensions entirely. I started having them too. Dreams where I was floating high above the earth, seeing it the way the thing saw it, not as a collection of countries and cities and people, but as a vast feeding ground. A place where billions of conscious minds generated the energy it needed to sustain itself. In these dreams, I could feel its hunger. Not malicious exactly, just necessary. It had been starved for over a century, trapped in that basement while the world above it grew and changed and multiplied. Now it was free and it was trying to regain its strength. The problem was, human consciousness wasn't meant to be consumed like that. We're not built to have our dreams and thoughts and memories siphoned away. Some people's minds snapped under the pressure and retreated into comas. Others went insane, babbling about impossible geometries and colors that didn't exist. And a very few, seemed to adapt to the contact. They became something between human and whatever the thing was. I met one of them in a diner outside Redding, California. Her name was Linda, and she'd been a kindergarten teacher before the thing passed through her town. Now she sat in a corner booth, sketching diagrams that hurt to look at directly, mathematical equations that seemed to move on the page, geometric shapes that implied dimensions the human eye wasn't equipped to process. "You're the one who let it out," she said without looking up from her drawing. It wasn't a question, so I didn't bother denying it. "I can see the connection," she continued, finally meeting my eyes. Hers were still brown, still human, but there was something else behind them now. A depth that seemed to go on forever. Like a thread of light connecting you to it. Just grateful, you know. More grateful than you can imagine. "What's it doing?" I asked. "Where's it going?" Linda smiled, and for a moment, her face seemed to flicker. Like I was seeing multiple versions of her superimposed over each other, the kindergarten teacher she'd been, the strange hybrid she was now, and something else entirely. "It's going home," she said. "Back to where it came from. But it needs to feed first to regain enough strength for the journey. And it's learning about this world, about the creatures that kept it trapped for so long." "People are dying," I said. "People die anyway," she replied, going back to her sketching. "At least this way, their consciousness becomes part of something greater. Something that exists beyond the limitations of flesh and time." I left the diner feeling sick. Linda had been human once, with human concerns and human attachments. Now she talked about mass death like it was a minor inconvenience. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've been following the thing's path across Nevada, watching the trail of affected communities grow longer and more severe. The CDC has mobilized, the National Guard has been called in to quarantine the worst-hit areas, and conspiracy theories are spreading faster than the sleep disorders themselves. But here's the thing that really scares me: I'm starting to understand it. In my dreams, I can feel what the thing feels. I can see what it sees. And from its perspective, humans aren't individuals with hopes and fears and families who love them. We're just resources. Batteries generating the consciousness energy it needs to survive. It doesn't hate us any more than we hate the bacteria we kill with antibiotics. We're just not on the same level of existence. And the longer I'm connected to it, the more I'm starting to see things from that perspective. Last night, I dreamed I was floating above a small town in eastern Nevada. I could see the people below going about their lives, working, sleeping, loving, dreaming. And all I could think about was how bright their minds looked in the darkness, how much energy they contained. I woke up hungry in a way I'd never experienced before. Not for food, but for something else. Something I could almost taste when I looked at other people. I think I'm changing. Becoming something like Linda, something between human and whatever the thing is. And the worst part? I'm not sure I want to fight it anymore. Because I can feel what it felt, trapped in that basement for over a century. I can understand its gratitude for being freed. And I'm starting to think that maybe becoming part of something vast and eternal isn't such a terrible fate. The thing is heading west toward the Pacific Ocean. I don't know what happens when it gets there. Maybe it goes back to whatever dimension it came from. Maybe it calls others of its kind. Maybe it just keeps feeding until there's nothing left. I should try to stop it. I know that. I should find a way to trap it again or destroy it or at least warn people about what's coming. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to keep following it. Keep dreaming its dreams and seeing through its eyes. Keep becoming whatever it is I'm becoming. Because here's the truth I don't want to admit. Being connected to something that vast and ancient and powerful feels incredible. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm part of something important. Something that exists beyond the petty concerns of human existence. My family spent 4 generations sacrificing themselves to keep this thing contained. But maybe they were wrong. Maybe some prisons are meant to be broken. Maybe some doors are meant to be opened. I can feel it calling to me now, somewhere ahead on the highway. It knows I'm following and it's pleased. We're connected now, the thing and I, bound together by gratitude and guilt and something that might be love. Tomorrow I'll reach the coast. Tomorrow I'll finally meet it face to face, outside of dreams and visions. Tomorrow I'll find out what I really unleashed on the world. And honestly, I can't wait. If you're reading this, you should probably stay away from the Pacific Northwest for a while. Hell, maybe stay away from the whole West Coast. Because something's coming, something that's been trapped and starved and angry for over a century. But don't worry too much. It's not evil, not really. It's just hungry. And soon it won't be hungry anymore. The door must not be opened, Harold's letter said. But some doors have to be opened eventually. Some things have to be set free. Trust me on this one.